And this is part of a broader pattern that it's not just a Trump-specific issue, that people are saying, oh, Trump is destroying norms. That's actually healthy because the other presidents before him were also anti-Venezuelan. So from the time of George W. Bush to
For
Obama
sure.
to Trump 1.0 and Biden,
Biden, yeah.
the American foreign policy establishment has been very hostile to Venezuela.
Hello, everyone. This is going to be a special session uh, for our Niti Vidhana or as part of our Niti Vidhana program, which we run, which is a civilisational policy program. And Ruchir Sharma, as you all know, is a political commentator and our resident geopolitics expert. And he's here to talk about the Venezuelan, the crisis that's going on, and the unfolding events that have followed. And we're so glad to have him here today and to talk about all of the things that have been happening recently. Thank you so much for coming, Richard.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm very happy to
Yeah,
join you again. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting topics unfolding in front of our eyes. 2026, it's been 3 weeks of 2026. We've already seen crises in Venezuela, in Iran, in Greenland, and all with a common factor of who's accelerating these. And it's a great opportunity to deconstruct what's happening and make sense of it and see what lessons we can learn for the future from this.
absolutely. And from our perspective, I feel like it's such an interesting time to be alive, also, in the sense that, we think that with all the wars, like with World War II, we think that things have ended, but it's just invasion on invasion, regime change, and all of that. So we'll be unpacking all of that today. So thank you so much again. I'll just jump right in. I wrote down some points for our discussion today, and I'll just jump in. So first, I just want to go over kind of a broad picture of the issue that has happened, and we'll start with Venezuela and how the U.S. used domestic law basically to try and prosecute a sitting president of another sovereign nation, brought him over illegally through a raid and a bombing on foreign soil, and now they're trying to prosecute him in an American court. Again, America is acting as if they were the UN, but except outside of international law, and exercising all these powers that don't really exist in international law. So, what has happened? What has led to this? How can such a brazen act even happen before our very eyes? And how come no one is raising a hue and cry about this? Like, what is going on? And I want you to help us unpack what's going on.
Sure. So I can say straight up that what happened in Venezuela with Nicolas Maduro and his wife was a kidnapping. So there's no two ways
Exactly.
about it. The people are using all sorts of terms: raid, extradition, rendition. It was a kidnapping. There's no basis for this in international law or in domestic law either. This is completely extrajudicial. It's a violation of that country's sovereignty. It's a violation of its borders, of its legal system, and the president, according to international law, is the legal representative of the state, is the personification of the state. So this is a huge violation of not just the law, but even of the norms that govern the relations that states have with each other, of reciprocity, of the concept of sovereignty. That if you can just fly over and raid and attack the palace or the presidential palace of any country you don't like, kidnap the president, take them to your country, and do a kangaroo court, what's stopping other countries from doing the same? So this is quite a new and unprecedented event,
And
especially in
alarming.
today's age of yes of social media. That's happening in front of our eyes. It's not been done in secret. It's not like Patrice Lumumba of the Congo who was kidnapped and then killed before the rise of modern social media and mass media. This has happened in front of us, and they boasted about it. That wow, look what we did. This is our power. And this is part of a broader pattern that it's not just a Trump specific issue, that people are saying, oh, Trump is destroying norms. That's actually healthy because the other presidents before him were also anti Venezuelan. So from the time of George W. Bush to
Bush,
Obama
yeah.
to Trump 1.0 and Biden,
Biden, yeah.
the American foreign policy establishment has been very hostile to Venezuela. They didn't like the electoral choices that the people of Venezuela were making. That the Venezuelan government sought to nationalize its oil reserves.
Oil
It sought
reserves.
to, yes, use that for its own brand of welfareism. It was one of the most prosperous countries within Latin America. And then this was unacceptable to the US. So they put in all sorts of sanctions on Venezuela, on Venezuelan officials. And this is akin to a policy they've had in that region for a long time. Even in the 1960s and 70s, Chile was a similar country.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So
Chile had huge copper reserves. Chile nationalized their copper reserves, and the US gave the order to make their economy scream. So by engaging in economic warfare, you strangle the economy of the country, you put sanctions to make the lives of ordinary citizens difficult, and you think that, oh, with that, then they'll blame their government. That doesn't always happen. Generally,
Yeah.
when you put sanctions and you make people miserable, they then rally behind the flag and say, oh, this is character building. The Americans are doing this to us, or the Europeans are doing this to us. They become more nationalistic and more patriotic. And maybe a small sliver of the elite, they run away to the West, and then they do activism for regime change.
Yeah.
And that's where the US then comes in and
Right.
seeks to replace the leadership. And that can be through protest, through
Precisely.
a coup d'etat, yeah, all sorts of, and now
Yeah.
through kidnapping.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we laugh, but it's like, it's serious, and it's like, it's crazy and insane. And there's just, again, all these questions, right? What is the UN doing? What is the Security Council doing? What are the other countries on the Security Council doing? Why is the UK supporting this? Because there were reports that UK froze the president's uh, gold reserves from using their, wealth for anything,
Mhm.
and that kind of puts his hands in a cuff, um, and kind of leads to this and helps the situation for the US. So, what is everyone doing? Why are the Western powers just sitting ducks, right, for US elite? And like, why isn't the world order being disrupted in any way when such an unprecedented event takes place? You know?
Well, I think we we look at the Western powers as a block of equal status countries, but essentially it's more like the ancient Persian Empire, where there's Cyrus the Great or Darius the Great, which is the U.S., and then he has his satraps who can manage the provinces. But the core of power radiates from the emperor. And it's very rare for a satrap or for a vassal to contradict what the emperor has turned into reality. This isn't just theoretically saying we're going to go in and do this. It's already been done, and they have to deal with it. And they're scared of their suzerain. They're scared of the hegemon. And it's also that the public in these countries have been conditioned with 20 years of saying Venezuela is a rogue state. It has an evil regime. It's like you call a dog a mad dog so that you can then kill it.
Put it
So
down,
now
yes.
there's no outright you can put it down. But it doesn't need to be truthful, but it's been massaged into people's brains for so long that
Yeah.
now all that the Western countries have said is that oh, we're monitoring the situation, but oh, we need a democratic transition. They're all happy that it happened because the mad dog has been taken away to the pound,
Yes.
as they see
Yes.
it, and now they're just debating on what the best way forward is to replace that administration, to
Right.
replace the
Right.
leadership. They don't have any ethical, moral,
Candidate.
legal
Right.
objections to the kidnapping.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's frightening. Again, the UN just standing by, like you said. I feel like everyone, like you said, are just they're just vassals to the United States, and that's another scary, frightening proposition economically and internationally in general. But also, like you brought up, the role of the press. Also, I feel like not just there's not just is there not a hue and cry about this, but they're actively whitewashing and propagandizing not just previous events that have happened in Venezuela, like you said, like labeling Maduro like a power hungry or an autocrat, and that's the beginning of propagandizing and priming the public sentiment towards this being an okay thing to do, right?
Yes.
And like we mentioned, the BBC, I think there was a circular that the BBC, that the press in the BBC got, that they weren't allowed to use the word kidnapped; they can only use the word captured, and
Yes.
it's frightening that there's that sort of that level of control that happens. And also, whatever reporting we saw, especially from the US and other Western outlets, I feel like maybe Russian portals were like more accurate on the matter. But whatever reporting we saw, oh, he's on trafficking charges and drug charges. When just a month ago or something, Trump had pardoned the Honduran president for drug charges, and there was and fentanyl is like a bigger issue in the United States than he's like making it out to be, and it's a big mess. So what do you think about kind of the propaganda regime that's like mounting or has been in place for a long time actually?
Yes, well, it's good that you mentioned the BBC. That their case of self censorship is very interesting. That
Yeah.
the BBC and then others as well, CBS, CNN, MSNBC. So not just the state broadcasters, but even the private ones. They need access to government officials in order to break stories, and it's made clear to them through various incentives and disincentives that if they don't toe the line on American foreign policy, they will lose access. And then they'll be at a competitive disadvantage to the others. So they're so scared of losing their access that they engage in self censorship so that they don't antagonize any government officials. So they play a big part in propagandizing the masses, uh, massaging their minds with state approved narratives against all sorts of countries that essentially are closed to Western capital. What it
Yes.
comes down to is, can Western companies, and specifically Americans, not so much about French companies. In fact, the US gets upset if French companies tread on its toes. But American companies need to have access to your market. They need to be able to invest in your local companies. They need to be able to sell their products to you in the traditional East India style company style of what's called mercantilism. You buy cheap raw materials from the colonies, you process it in your country, and then you sell the finished products to them. That's what they need to do. That's what how they make money. That's how the global north, the wealthy countries of today, gained their wealth and maintained their wealth even
Right.
today. So
Right.
any country that is closed off to this sort of style of economic exploitation is then tarred as autocratic, authoritarian. I sometimes even see just straight up bad guys. I think the Atlantic a few years ago had an amazing cover of the bad guys of the world, and it was Putin, it was Maduro, it was Lukashenko, and now we see it as well with Iran. That
Right.
immediately after the kidnapping of Maduro, before the world has even had time to process it, then it's the razzle dazzle. You punch with your right hand, you punch again with your left hand, and leave the observers confused on what to respond to. This is a style of policy making that the White House has adopted, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy, that they don't want to give time to the media, to other countries, to the public to process and understand what's happening. You need to keep landing blows, blows, blows every day. Every day you need to create new news so that you overwhelm people and then they don't question or they lose their ability to find their own perspective on these things.
Right. Absolutely. And that brings us straight into like why Venezuela was targeted in this manner. And it's not just it's not just that Maduro is like an independent, kind of a strong voice against Western hegemony and entry into their markets and exploitation and all of these things, but also just the oil reserves they have. I feel the largest oil reserves in the world. So again, and there are hundreds of memes about the U.S. and their history with oil-rich countries. What do you think about kind of this open and brazen kind of threat to these nations uh, for American capital like Exxon and Chevron and like how they need to get their money and they're saving them and saving American dollars and like all of that. Like what do you think? What's your take on all this?
Well, this mentality is over 120 years old, that the US sees both North and America as its own backyard, as the sole hegemonic power in that region, even during phases of American isolationism. So, even in the early 1900s, when the US did not believe in what they call entangling alliances, when they did
Hmm.
not want to intervene with wars happening in Europe. They did not, over time want to join the League of Nations. They still saw themselves as the pole star of the New World, of the Americas, North America,
Right,
South America. No other country is allowed to have a say there. This is America's
right,
backyard, and they'll do what they want there. It also
right.
helps that they're insulated by the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. So even if another country, another major power tried, they would be at
Hmm.
a huge disadvantage. So they
Right,
know that this is what they see as their natural sphere of influence, where no one can or should interfere in their pursuit of foreign policy goals, which are generally an extension of domestic policy goals of their own oil industry, their own finance industry. And we've seen this over time. The most regime change, the most number of coups d'etats and depositions of democratically elected governments have happened in
in South
Latin
America.
America.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes, yes,
and
yeah.
uh, this is an unfortunate consequence of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine says
Hmm.
that, yeah, this is America's backyard and we'll do what we want.
Yeah.
So that's what they're doing. Uh, they hadn't been this brazen about it for about uh, 40 years or so. There wasn't just Chile in 1973, but in the 80s as
Mm.
well, Reagan did a lot of bad things there with Nicaragua, with Honduras, with Grenada.
Right, right,
So it's even in the Caribbean. Now,
right.
it's not that Venezuela is a perfect country. It also had a border dispute with its neighbor, with Guyana,
Hmm.
which is also related to an oil-rich territory. It's called Essequibo in
Hmm.
Guyana. But the president of Guyana, Irfan Ali, And Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan president, did talk about it and said that the borders will not be changed by force. And that was
Right.
in November, December 2023.
Okay.
So, there's disputes, but that doesn't mean that you go fly in with your SEAL Team 6 and kidnap their president.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
And this kind of brings me into, you mentioned this earlier also about how Trump is no exception. So, if we were to talk about just American greed and warmongering, Trump is just like the other presidents, if not worse. And I feel like some of the Americans are justifying this, or just painting it out to be an act of insanity by Trump, who does another insane thing every other day. And that kind of diminishes the history of the American regime in actively and deliberately engaging in propaganda, regime change operations in almost like every country in Latin America, like you said, in Africa and all these places, in order to profiteer for the American billionaires. So, uh, what do you think about this, and like how does it tie into everything?
all right. Well, I would not say that Trump is worse. I think because he's transparent
Exactly.
about it, he's better. It's
Yes.
better to be, shot, in your chest than in your back.
Yes. I
Because at
agree.
least you know what's happening. You're not being betrayed or being tricked or having the wool pulled over your eyes. So, what he's doing, the goals are the same. It's just that the way he does it is a lot more transparent. It's a lot more brutish. And then, so some people have a problem with the aesthetics of what he's doing, but not the outcomes. So, in
Yeah.
fact, even though they dislike the fact that he did it and he did it in this brash way, you see, even Democrats, even Democratic politicians, even Democratic
Right.
affiliated media personalities, they said, "Wow, finally he's acting like a president. Finally, oh, he's doing something good for it."
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
them, this is presidential. That a U.S. president who goes and engages in regime change is a normal president. They were very worried about
Yes.
Trump,
Yes.
that he came to power as the
Yes.
candidate of peace. He said no more wars, no more interventions. We're going to retreat into our own sphere of influence. That worried them a
Right.
lot. It worried the establishment.
Right.
So many people
Right.
have built their careers around the US government, its army, its navy, its intelligence services being a mercenary private military corporation for their interests, for the oil industry, for the finance industry, for industrial interests within the US. So many of them felt relieved when he did this. Many of them felt proud when he did this because this was normal. So it's so normal for a president to engage in this that for many Americans, it's a relief when he does this. It's like, oh, at least, there's one norm he's not destroying. He's still furthering our interests. And if they have
Absolutely.
any disagreements, it's about how it looked. So it's purely an aesthetic disagreement. None of them will
Absolutely.
say this was wrong, this was illegal, you need to restore Maduro back to his position in Caracas. They'll be like, oh, it's so bad that he did it this way, but well, now we can look forward to a new democratic future for Venezuela.
Exactly. And I feel like Americans feed off of this sort of like brash display of power. I feel like that's in their DNA. And like you said, I feel like it's something about Trump, because initially I think Trump was a little anti-establishment, a little, I want to shake things up. And I feel like that worried the deep state a little bit, like you said. You're very right when you say that. I feel like, like you saw the Venezuela incident shot up the oil stock across the board. The big companies, I think, gained like 10 plus points, and billions just from the invasion. So I think it's just another day in the life of the American state. And like you said, yeah, absolutely. I want to I think I want to touch on like what the UN is doing a little bit. And we talked about this in parts, but just want to address it again. So Jeffrey Sachs addressed the UN Security Council, and he said in the past year, the US has carried out bombing operations in 7 countries, none of which were authorized by the Security Council, none of which were undertaken in lawful self-defense. And often we hear critique that NATO also acts outside of the UN's, you know, instructions
Mandate, yes. Hmm.
and mandates. So I think just the history of American interference in sovereign nations, and there's the sort of savior complex. I feel like you said, while the entire thing is often about economics, the American people also kind of see themselves as like a savior complex, and the president acting through them in order to bring democracy and bring all of this to other nations. We know that Obama was like literally called the bomber in chief, and he bombed Iraq, Afghanistan, and all these places on a day to day, killing civilians, all of that. We know the U.S. history in Vietnam and how they literally killed millions of civilians and tried to make it look like the Viet Cong was doing it.
Hmm.
And this is, I think, this is just normal. And what I'm alarmed about and why I keep saying this is because it's the normalization of the regime change, and the normalization is alarming. And we live in an age of social media, and we wish there was more of a hue and cry. We wish the people in power cared about these things to do something about it. We wish the UN, the head of the UN, head of the Security Council, gave out statements that reflected public sentiment about this. So, what do you think about this, and what does it even mean? There is no international law essentially that's not American law. So what do we even do? What do nations like India do about this?
Well, the international law is a concept that only works if you believe in it, because there's no international police force out there enforcing it. So it is dependent on the mutual goodwill and adherence to it by the parties to it. So after we mentioned, oh, so many countries are called rogue states. The rogue states that act the most often in contravention of international law are NATO member states. There have been many examples of their interventions without a UN mandate, one of which is now backfiring on them quite badly, which was that in 2008, they supported the secession of the autonomous province of Kosovo and Metohija from
Yes.
Serbia. And
Yes.
this is a province that is seen as the heart and core of Serbian culture. It's where their most sacred monasteries are. It's where a lot of their literature is written. It's part of their core national identity. Because it uh, was a region where, through historical reasons, through Ottoman Turkish occupation, there was now a Albanian Muslim majority. The US and NATO saw it as a potential ally. And once there was the so called Kosovo Liberation Army, which was notorious for narco trafficking and human trafficking,
Yes. Yes.
organ smuggling, they sought to create an independent Kosovo. This was supported by NATO, and they changed the borders by force. By NATO being the allied army of this non-state actor, which the Serbian
Yes.
government saw as
Yeah.
terrorists.
Right.
So now, if NATO thinks that they can just change borders by force like that, now there's a lot of Schadenfreude from Serbs, as they see the same thing happening to Denmark with Greenland. And Denmark
Right.
was one of the most enthusiastic countries about this. Denmark was one of the first, if not the first, country to recognize an independent Kosovo once it was created through this military intervention. And now it's the same principle that can be used to snatch away Greenland
To
from
annex
Denmark.
Greenland.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's not Danish majority. It
Yeah.
has its own culture. It doesn't matter how significant it is to Denmark, and who's going to stop you. So this was a very dangerous precedent that they set in the past, and even the Russian Federation today, when they say that they're intervening with their special military operation in eastern Ukraine, they use the example of Kosovo. That if you think that whenever a minority becomes a majority in a certain province, it has the right to become an independent country and split off, and that it can have international allies who intervene to ensure this outcome, then if it was good for Kosovo being split off from Serbia, why isn't it good for Donetsk and Lugansk being split off from Ukraine? Why isn't it good for Greenland to be split off
Greenland to
from
be
Denmark?
Denmark, right? I think this is one of those instances of just a big bully um, kind of beating states into submission and compliance by just doing what it wants first, whether they have the assent of the international community or not, whether they have the UN's assent or not. And often I feel like in this case, it just bites Denmark in the behind after. If you think about recognizing Kosovo as a state, um, and along the same lines, kind of the same rule being applied to you, and then it's like alarming and all of these things. I feel like this is it's again Western nations kind of overestimating their own influence and power, and also underestimating what the US is really capable of and what they can actually do to you in your backyard.
Yes,
So I yeah, yeah, go ahead.
they have a very strong in group out group mentality that, oh, it was fine to do this to the out group. It doesn't matter. It's fine to
Exactly.
use chemical weapons in Iraq. Just don't use
Ex-
them on Western countries. It's fine to split off
exactly.
separatist provinces in Serbia. Just don't do it in Greenland.
Exactly. And they did the same thing, like you said, arming rebellious groups in Nicaragua and all of that, and in Kosovo and wherever they go, honestly, or wherever anything is happening. And then if you do it in Denmark, in a sovereign portion of their nation, it becomes like a huge, issue. Again, I feel like the opinion is divided on Greenland, even from within Denmark. If I'm right. So what's going on there? What are they going to use to justify the annexation of Greenland? And what do you think is going to happen there?
They don't need to justify anything. Did Cyrus the Great or Darius the Great have to justify anything to their
His
vassals and
actions,
satraps?
yeah.
No.
Right.
The sovereign is the sovereign because he decides what is right and what is wrong. So, in Kosovo, the U.S. got to create a NATO base, Camp Bondsteel. It's the only NATO base in the region. And now they want to have a military base of their own in Greenland. They want access to Greenland's resources. And some people are saying that, oh, maybe Denmark should try selling it to the US, like the Russian Empire sold Alaska to the US. It doesn't matter if you are willing or not. The US wants to take it, and it's also part of the power projection that you're not giving it to them. They have to take it from you to humiliate you. And
Yes.
I find it very just and very amusing that it's happening to Denmark, and that it's and similarly Canada, Japan, South Korea, the countries that Trump is the most hostile to within their alliance are the ones who were the most loyal to them. They're the ones when in the past, when Bush, when Obama said you're going to join us in our interventions in Iraq, in Kosovo. Uh, the ones who are the most loyal, the most servile, are the ones that he beats the most because he knows they have no choice. When he brandishes his stick, when Trump brandishes his stick against Denmark and Canada, they don't stand up for themselves. They start crying. They start crying, oh, why are you doing this to me? I've been so loyal. I've done everything you wanted. Denmark lost the most troops per capita in Iraq. Denmark spied on Germany for you. So Angela Merkel and 300 bureaucrats in Germany had their phones tapped by the NSA. It was done
Right.
by Denmark on behalf of the US. So Denmark is
Right.
willing to do the dirty work. So then they're upset that, oh, why are you punishing us? It's precisely because of that. You have no self-respect. You did whatever was asked of them.
Yeah.
Who does the U.S. respect among all its allies? It respects the ones who are troublemakers. The US would never do this to Turkey. They would never do this to Israel. They would never do this to Pakistan. They would never do this to Qatar. Because these four countries are as crazy as the US. They're willing to do anything. They have a gun. They can point it at your enemies. They can point it at you.
Look
They
at
can
you.
point it at
Right.
themselves. Anything is possible. So and
That's
and
so
and
funny.
and that gives them a nuisance value that makes them valuable. That whenever I see Canada or Denmark or South Korea being pushed around, it reminds me of a very classic scene from the Indian film Sholay, that Gabbar Singh is confronting his men for failing, and then he punishes them. But failure, weakness must be punished. And he plays Russian roulette with them, with the three of them. And when he reaches the last one, Kalia, what does Kalia say? He says, "Oh, मैंने आपका नमक खाया है." So, I'm
Yeah,
loyal to
yeah.
you. And then what does
Yes,
Gabbar
yes.
Singh say? "Ab goli kha." Now you can eat a bullet.
Yeah,
And and he shoots them all in the end and
yeah,
says,
yeah.
"Jo dar gaya, wo mar gaya." If you're scared, you're as good as dead.
Your death,
So
right.
yeah, so this is the mentality that, and it's transparent now. I don't know why people are surprised about it.
Right.
That it's very clear
Yeah,
that this is the way the US operates,
you're
and
right.
now it's more transparent than ever. And you have to deal with this new reality. And similarly, now you see a couple of days ago, Trump leaked private messages that Emmanuel Macron sent to
Macron,
him
yeah.
through diplomatic
Yeah.
channels. And it was also servile that France, despite being a UN Security Council member state, part of the Permanent Five, despite being an
Quite powerful.
independent nuclear power, despite
Yes.
having its own overseas territories, he's saying things like, "Oh, we could be doing great things together in Iran. We could be doing great things together in the Middle East. Why are you so fixated on Greenland?" So what does this mean? It means, oh, we're happy to do bad things with you when
Right.
it's happening in the global south against our enemy regimes. Oh, yeah, Iran and Iraq are bad, so we'll help you with that. We can do great things in Syria. Yeah, you're doing great things. You brought ISIS to power and Al Qaeda to power. Great job. They're
Yeah.
happy to do that. He's throwing away his sovereignty to
Yeah.
demonstrate his what he thinks is usefulness, but this is seen as
Yeah.
servility. That
Right.
what does Trump see? Why did he leak this? Because he senses blood in the water. He's a shark, and you're going to flail around like an injured seal instead of standing up for yourself. What is the shark going to do? The shark's going to bite you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like,
And
why are you doing it to Denmark? Okay, well, you're willing to do it in Syria. You've said that you're willing to help the US in Syria, willing to do it in Iran. If the US wants to do the same thing in Denmark, then it's, oh, because poor little Denmark is a NATO country, it's a white country, it's a rich country, it's immune to the same consequences that other countries have.
yeah, and it's a nice sort of, it ties right into kind of the Western um, just opinion about itself. Like, I feel like just a superiority complex about the global south and about a nation's poorer class. Just in general, like, I feel like the respect is only towards other bully nations like Turkey, you mentioned Qatar, who have their own independent wealth plus nuclear weapons, plus like everything that the US has, except they don't bend to the US will. And unfortunately, I feel like Venezuela, even though they weren't willing to sort of be subservient to the West. Somewhere they're not a powerful enough state to be an actual threat, and therefore they had to like kind of pay for no fault of their own really. It's not. I mean, I feel like nowhere are the Venezuelans like have a perfect life or something, but I feel like they're getting there. They're a Latin American country in its own kind of trajectory to development. It's kind of sad to see. Greenland, I feel like I'm kind of neutral. I don't. I want to get your opinion also, but I feel like we're kind of least bothered by what happens in Europe on some level. They're gonna be fine. That's what I think, and they're not. I feel like the same violence won't be subject to Greenland as they have been doing in Afghanistan or Iran. I feel like the treatment will be a little different just because they're white people, and so that makes me feel a little secure. What do you think?
Well, also, Denmark is not capable of defending the country against the US and doesn't have the
Yes,
self respect necessary to do so.
to
Denmark
do
couldn't
so.
defend itself against the Nazis. Well, it lasted 2 days against the Nazis, perhaps. And they made a film about how heroic those 2 days were. And then they show it to the kids. Oh, we have such a proud history of resistance. Iraq managed to resist for a long time because they're proud. They're proud that this is the cradle of civilization, that they're the successors to Mesopotamia, to Assyria, to Ashurbanipal, and to Babylon. So uh, Denmark, is a very brutal colonial administrator in Greenland. That they
Yeah,
snatch babies from families, saying that Greenlandic indigenous women are unfit mothers. They sterilize women without their consent. They, forcibly made Greenlanders adopt Protestantism, speak Danish rather than their own language, and it's all whitewashed by wholesome Scandinavian social democracy, but they are a colonial power in Greenland. There are tensions between the indigenous Greenlandic population and the central government in Copenhagen. And if the US wants to use that as a wedge, it's interesting to watch as an observer. Because, yeah, if they choose to take this territory by force, there's not going to be much resistance from the Danish
resistance.
army or
Right.
its allies. Even now, they're saying, oh, Germany is sending support. They sent one military officer to Greenland as a show of support. Poland is saying, "Oh, we support Denmark." People were joking, "Yeah, Poland is sending troops so that they'll fight on behalf of the Americans when they come," because Poland also is quite pro-American and want to demonstrate their utility. When the U.S. is threatening to back out of Ukraine, which is quite important to Polish national interests. So uh, this also brings us back to the Kosovo example or the Greenland example brings us back to a question that you mentioned earlier. What does this mean for India? That the Kosovo example is particularly dangerous for India because India has its own similar autonomous territory, which is the cradle of a lot of the Indian social,
Culture and
religious,
civilization.
cultural history.
Right.
And through foreign occupation and invasion and demographic change, the indigenous Kashmiri Pandits are now a minority there in Jammu and Kashmir. And if we go with this precedent of Kosovo, that when a national minority becomes a majority in X province, it's not enough that they have autonomy. They have to be stripped from the country and made into an independent state. So then, what if one day the Lashkar-e-Toiba handpicks someone, sends them to Turkey, and then they declare themselves, "I'm the prime minister in exile of an independent Kashmir." And then NATO and the US and all of their lackeys support it. They're like, yes, minorities have a right to self-determination when they become majorities in a specific province. And they come in, use that precedent to create an American vassal state and build an American base at a very strategic location from where they can strike China, where they can strike Russia, where they can strike India,
Absolutely. Yeah.
control the rivers going into both India and Pakistan. That's quite dangerous. And I don't think
It's scary.
enough Indian foreign policy commentators have focused on this topic. The scholars have not focused on the topic. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, is very clear that we don't recognize Kosovo. We take the side of Serbia in this dispute.
Mm.
And similarly, there you also have the case of
Catalonia and Spain.
yes, exactly. Spain is one of the few countries within
Yeah,
NATO that doesn't
yeah,
recognize Kosovo,
yeah.
and I believe Romania and Greece also don't support them because they side with the fellow Orthodox countries, and also
Right.
because of the case of Cyprus, because Cyprus is another country where a NATO member state invaded and took away 40% of its territory, created their own fake state, Turkish Republic of North Cyprus, not recognized by anyone, but no one can undo that. And even
It is unfortunate.
the plans to reunify Cyprus, for example, the Kofi Annan plan,
Hmm.
did not say that 400,000 Turkish settlers need to go back to Anatolia. They said, "Oh, let's give them lots of rights, and special privileges, so that the country can be
They
merged."
can
And
integrate. Yeah,
yes, and the Republic of Cyprus, this went to a referendum. The Republic of Cyprus, the public there rejected it. They said reunification shouldn't come at the cost of putting these settlers on top of our heads and giving them a veto of everything. That they shouldn't be rewarded for illegally invading and then settling Cyprus's sovereign territory.
absolutely. Right. So again, like you said, this brings me to like another question I'd written down. International law, you mentioned this earlier also, survives not because powerful states respect it, but because influential middle powers insist on it. I feel like it's their only cushion. And India's resistance to like external interference, for the most part, and its own experience of colonial domination and its commitment to multilateralism impose a responsibility that extends beyond diplomatic convenience. So, in a sense, India's position is strategic on Kosovo and other matters. But what should India's position be on Venezuela? Do you think their statement was, harsh enough or like strong enough? And what can we do going forward that sort of prevents interference in our backyard? Like you said, Kashmir is a contested and like you said, an extremely fragile, vulnerable issue. It's something that can bring India a lot of harm in the future. And we haven't paid enough attention to what the US can actually do exploiting this, especially having Pakistan next door. So, what should India's position be on all of these things? And what can we do to make ourselves a stronger state internationally while also, not ruffling feathers necessarily?
So, India is a very unique country in that on foreign policy, it's very sovereign. On foreign policy, India is quite capable of taking unorthodox stances, for standing up for smaller countries, standing up for the Group of 77, the G77, or for the Pacific Island countries, or in general for it's a legacy of the non-aligned movement. So for countries that uh, didn't want to have to choose between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc during the Cold War, it was very important that large militarily powerful and relevant
Nations
states like India or Yugoslavia, Indonesia, Egypt were part of that,
stood up.
because
Yes, yes.
all of these were very strong regional powers. So uh, the issue is not so much that India takes the wrong stances on foreign policy. Generally, they vote alongside other global south countries at the UN. Generally, the Ministry of External Affairs takes balanced and nuanced stances. They don't jump into line, like many countries do, to support whatever the US does. And the best way to do that is to invoke international law, saying that it needs to be respected, norms need to be upheld, and the bigger issue is domestically, the Indian state is not clear on what its goals are for the long term. And it is planting the seeds of its own destruction by not solving the issues around separatism. And it's not just about Jammu and Kashmir. If in the future there's a attempt to create a Protestant sovereign state out of Nagaland, half of Manipur, and then a border province of Burma, of Myanmar. Uh, what's there to stop it? Generally,
Absolutely.
the Indian domestic solution to
Policy.
separatism
Hmm.
is to bribe them until they pretend to be loyal. That it's okay that you kill people, as long as you don't split off. And that's how a lot of separatism has been. Don't want to say solved, but managed so far.
Hmm.
That
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
you create a system where you rent their loyalty by paying them off or carving out exceptionalism, giving them autonomy, giving them special privileges, and you hope that then they will stop taking up arms against the state and just terrorize civilians at the individual level, which is apparently an acceptable price to pay for the republic. Now, this is very dangerous because you're creating fault lines, you're exacerbating fault lines within the country that will be used by foreign actors, by regime change agents, by countries that love a good separatist movement. They will send funding, they'll send money, they'll give diplomatic support. And the best example of this, I mentioned it just now with the non-aligned movement, the closest analogy to India in
Hmm.
so modern India, the Republic of India, in the last 100 years is Yugoslavia, post-war Yugoslavia. After the Second World War, the Socialist Federative Republic of Yugoslavia is very similar to India. That it ended its period of occupation. So Yugoslavia was occupied by three powers over time. So by the Ottomans, the Ottoman Turks, by Austria-Hungary, and then during the war by Nazi Germany. Okay, you
Right.
threw out the occupiers, you created a new state. But now you want everyone to get along. So even though there were communities who were more loyal to the Ottomans or to the Germans. So Bosnians and Albanians were very grateful to the Turks because they were given a privileged position in society. Croats were very enthusiastic collaborators of the Nazis during the Nazi occupation. Now, okay, you decapitate their leadership. You send a bunch of their leaders off to a labor camp on an island off the coast of Dalmatia. Very good. But then you said, oh, everyone needs to get along. We're all brothers. Brotherhood and unity was the slogan of Yugoslavia. And with time, in 1974, they created a new constitution that was designed to take care of separatism by giving more rights to individual republics within it. So, but that wasn't enough. And then
It
you had
doesn't work.
exiles sitting in Canada, sitting in Australia, sitting in the US, who were like, this isn't enough. I demand an independent Croatia. I demand an independent Kosovo. And many of them turned to financing terrorists and separatist groups. And uh, throughout the 70s, so Yugoslavia up till the 70s, let's say, so between 1950s and the end of the 1970s, Yugoslavia was a very useful buffer state in that it was non-aligned, it was simultaneously socialist and nationalist. So it wasn't so communist that it was scary for the West, and it was a great buffer country because it separated Italy from the Eastern Bloc and was open to U.S. investment and Western investment. So the U.S. flooded the country. Oh, what a useful country! Let's give them lots of foreign investment. Let's give them lots of loans. Let's give them lots of money, pump it into their economy. It became the wealthiest country within the region, wealthier than Greece, which was a part of a NATO member. And then in the 80s, after Tito died, and after there was detente between the Eastern and Western blocs, so Reagan and Gorbachev suddenly are good friends, and we're going to have peace. We're going to reduce our nuclear weapons against each other, mostly because Gorbachev is capitulating. Then what happens to this buffer state? It's not useful anymore. So then the
Right.
US says, okay, now you pay us back for those loans. I don't care how you do it. We gave you the money, you want it back. And then that caused inflation, it caused stagnation of the economy, it caused shortages throughout the 80s. And then they had to service this debt to the IMF, to the International Monetary Fund, and to the US. And then what did the US and its NATO buddies, especially West Germany, do? They reached out to the regional leadership in Croatia, in Slovenia, and started seeding a very dangerous narrative, saying that, oh, you guys are the industrial core of this country. You work so hard. And do you see any of the money? No, because the politicians in Belgrade and the capital, they take your hard-earned money and they give it to lazy farmers in the cow belt in Serbia and in Macedonia and in Bosnia. If you declare independence, you can be industrialized, rich countries. We'll accept you into NATO. We'll accept you into the EU. We'll, give you weapons. We'll fund you, and we'll recognize you as soon as you declare independence. So in the 90s, that's exactly what happened. Slovenia was the first to declare independence. They got independence in 10 days. Croatia was next, and they fought a war for 3 years with Western backing. And they got independence. And they were
Right.
told that, oh, when you declare independence, you don't have to repay the loans. The loans are to be repaid by the capital, by Belgrade, which is in Serbia. So you get a clean start, and they're stuck with the stagnating economy.
The loans, right.
Yes, and that's similar to the kind of narratives we see now. You see Khalistanis say this, that Punjab feeds the country and we do this and we do that and everyone else should be grateful that we're so wealthy. They're wealthy because they're subsidized by the central government.
Yeah,
Similarly, you
exactly.
see DMK supporters saying, Tamil Nadu #1 because of our social justice and because of our car industry and industrialization. Similarly, this was all incentivized by the state government, by the federal government, so by the central government. But it's led to what's called the nationalism of the rich. That when a formerly poor province suddenly becomes rich within a generation through industrialization, they often become susceptible to racial supremacist ideas. And then this is used to split them up. And this has also happened in Italy, northern Italy, southern Italy. There's a similar dichotomy that you have people who want independence for northeast Italy, for Padania as it's called, because they claim that, we have all the industries and we're sick of financing lazy peasants and the mafia in the south. In Belgium, you have the difference between Flanders, the Dutch-speaking, Flemish-speaking north of the country, and Wallonia, which is French-speaking, Catholic, and in the past was the dominant community that Flanders wants to split off, saying that, we don't need these laggards, we're rich now. So this is very dangerous in terms of India's future, and it's something that unfortunately we're not studying. That China, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Chinese leadership were obsessed with how do we avoid such a fate for themselves. They've studied it, they've modeled it, how it happened, why it happened, and how to ensure that that never happens to the People's Republic of China. Have we shown any interest institutionally, governmentally, academically in this topic in India? No.
No, absolutely, yes. In fact, our until the previous government, and even to some extent now, perhaps, there's an active, funding of separatist ideas, narratives in academia and below. There's no real incentive to either crush or kind of create a harmonious sort of secondary narrative. And there's always, like, for instance, you mentioned Tamil Nadu and their separatism. I feel like there's no real action that is taken to kind of nip these in the bud. And even in Jammu and Kashmir, the situation has not improved over this time. Like you said, just money or a bribe doesn't cover up the separatist sentiment that boils under the surface, nor does it cover up the racism and the towards the minorities and the lack of any sort of idea towards national integration. So again, the Indian state this way domestically is extremely weak, and these are its vulnerabilities, and they're very clear to anyone that wants to exploit them. But luckily, we somewhat know that there's no such thing as a free lunch. U.S. interference comes at a huge price. U.S. money comes at a huge price. I feel like there is some active suppression or avoidance of interference on that level, and kind of protection of our own sovereignty that we do see. But yes, absolutely, I feel like institutionalizing some sort of policy measures towards actually correcting or suppressing separatist movements, figuring out what the solutions are, what other countries have done, perhaps learning from other movements across the world would be very helpful. And I feel like we see no active, action in that regard. So it's kind of sad because all of this kind of puts us at a disadvantage when we shouldn't be. I feel like that we have sufficient strength now and a sufficiently, effective government with the mandate of the people, and there needs to be more action taken in this, sphere. Um, but coming back to kind of the not Venezuela specifically, but the whole thing and what's been unfolding, where do you think like Indian civilizational values come to the fore? Where do you think our foreign policy, is can be positioned as an alternative? Our Bharatiya values or our civilization foreign policy can be positioned as a true, I want to say, and antagonistically to the current, global order. And what do you think about bringing more of our values into our foreign policy and our domestic policy, really?
Well, I think that our historical conception of foreign policy is valid even today, even by countries that they don't need to acknowledge the Mandal system of Chanakya about who's your sphere of influence, who's your friend, who's your enemy, in order to do it. It's a great framework in which to understand foreign policy. That
Absolutely.
the U.S. sees North and South America as its backyard. That's explained accurately by the Mandal theory. And why is the U.S. so hostile to Canada? Because as Chanakya said, your immediate neighbors will always be your closest threat. So you have to neutralize them one way or another. So you know as we let's say see countries like the US withdraw themselves from the international commitments, from modern international law, from modern global governance institutions like the UN, then we will see a return to ancient classical realism, that states follow their own interests and they decide who's their friend and enemy based on these interests and based on proximity, based on resources, based
Shared
on
interest,
nuisance
right?
value. Well, no,
Right.
not shared interest. Just the
No?
fact that you have an annoying neighbor like Canada means you have to slap it a few times so that it knows its place.
Right.
They have shared interests. That doesn't matter. The
Right.
fact is that it's on your border. It has to be neutralized. So they better know their place. And similarly, why is Russia doing a special military operation in Ukraine? Because Russia also follows the Mandal theory that the immediate neighbors need to be neutral and a buffer state between the next line between the West. So the big risk for them was Ukraine giving up its neutrality and
Mm,
joining NATO. That's a
mm,
red line that Russia won't accept. They don't want to have a hot border with NATO at any point. And in the past, it was the same with Finland. Finland was a very successfully neutral state ever since the war. Now, recently they joined NATO, just as NATO is falling apart. But being a buffer state was very helpful to Finland. So Finnish neutrality was called Finlandization, and there was a Finnish comedian who said, "Oh, it's the art of bowing to the east without mooning the west." So Finland was happy to trade with the Soviet Union, with its big scary neighbor, to buy peace, to avoid conflict. It worked very well. So uh, whenever there's an atmosphere internationally where international law takes a backseat, where global governance takes a backseat, the UN is rendered irrelevant or sidelined, then you can always go back to classical realism to explain the behaviors of states. So I think that's important as a framework to understand foreign policy. Now, in terms of practical applications, I think that there is an appetite within Indian policymaking circles to have a more Indianized foreign policy. And I mean, even our strategic partnerships. For example, there's an unlikely, on paper, an unlikely friendship, and that's between India and the Islamic Republic of Iran. One would
Yes.
think that pre-revolution Iran, under the emperor who called himself Arya Mihir, the light of the Aryas, who was doing a return to Cyrus and Darius and Persepolis, you would think that there would be a lot in common between that Iran and India. No,
But
under
that's
the
not true.
Shah, yeah, they
Right.
were American lackeys. They worked with Pakistan against India. And funnily enough, when the mullahs came to power, uh, that even though they made a few, grumbling remarks about Kashmir, in terms of foreign policy in practice, they have always taken India's side on issues of key importance. And
Right.
similarly, until recently, until U.S. pressure, India was very happy to buy Iranian oil, to invest in the Chahar Bahar port system, and to use that same Mandal system that your immediate neighbors are hostile to you. So Pakistan is hostile, Sri Lanka is hostile, Bangladesh is hostile.
Bangladesh.
So
Yeah.
then, what do you do? So then you get cozy with the next layer. It's like an onion. So you go to the the next layer, and that's Iran. So they say that you know your natural ally is the mandal after you, and that way Iran and India can squeeze Pakistan. They both dislike the Pakistani foreign policy establishment. Um, and that's something that we also see. India has quite good relations with Vietnam. That Vietnam is the country that is most hostile to the People's Republic of China, because they have fundamental disagreements on the style of communism they have, and also
Yeah.
because the Chinese supported the Khmer Rouge. They supported Pol Pot
Yes. Yeah.
in Cambodia, and it
Yes.
was Vietnam that did a humanitarian intervention
And
to invade.
liberated Cambodia.
Yes,
Right. Right.
exactly, and
Yeah.
liberated Cambodia from the Khmer Rouge. And that brings us to another point, that in the 70s and 80s, there were many third world countries that intervened militarily to stop genocides, to stop injustice, to stop colonial occupation, and were vilified for it by the West. I can give you many examples of that. So, who got rid of Idi Amin in Uganda when he was slaughtering people, when he drove out all the Asian origin citizens and residents? The international community didn't do anything. In the end,
Right.
it was Tanzania. So Tanzania invaded, deposed him, and restored normalcy to Uganda. Similarly, with
Right.
the Khmer Rouge, with Pol Pot in Cambodia, it was supported by the U.S. He was supported by the U.S. He was supported by China, even though he was, interior communist. He was a a very useful bulwark for these two countries against what they saw as a more eternal enemy, which is Vietnam. China and Vietnam have been enemies for 1,000 years. The US was greatly humiliated by their failure in the Vietnam War. So what do? You destabilize their region by getting a complete madman to power in Cambodia. And Vietnam intervened and liberated Cambodia from the Khmer Rouge. And then
Right.
similarly, you have East Pakistan, where there was a genocide of Bengali Hindus, of intellectuals, and it was in the end India who intervened to put an end to the genocide and to liberate Bangladesh. Now, these are three examples where these countries were vilified. Or, India liberated Goa from Portuguese rule. That's the
Portuguese
first
rule.
and possibly the only instance of a non-aligned country defeating a NATO country militarily. So, and these countries were vilified for it. But now, when the West does their regime change, we're supposed to clap, go, wow, advancing democracy, spreading freedom. You're spreading economic freedom for your companies to profiteer so that, in the colonial metropole, in the Western world, you can have more surplus. And this is why both the left wing and the right wing in the West are
Pro.
fundamentally and equally complicit in
Yeah.
imperialism,
Yes. Yes.
because they both want the extra surplus, just that the right
Yeah.
wing wants it to go to the companies and the left wing want part of it to be shared with the workers.
And the Democrats want to pretend or like frame it a different way so it doesn't look bad on them.
Oh
I
yes,
feel
yeah,
like
they'll say
that's something.
women's
Yeah.
rights,
Yeah.
LGBT
Yeah.
rights.
Yeah. Yeah.
They'll
Yeah.
say,
Exactly. Exactly.
again,
The,
aesthetic choices. That, for
yeah.
example, in Iran, Iran has quite a quite a progressive policy on trans people. But that's not something that will be brought up as part of the let's wave the rainbow flag and do some rainbow
Exactly.
imperialism there.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Have you seen that meme with the fighter jet with the rainbow flag? The Democrats do the flag and the LGBTQ kind of thing, and
Yes,
then they have the Democrats do like a MAGA things. See, the conservatives do like a MAGA thing. So it's just a change in the way they frame it, and
yes.
essentially the American elite and the deep state and both parties on either side just want the same thing for America, which is like just advancing their imperialist um, you know, uh, aspirations. So
Yes,
yeah, I feel
exactly.
like, yeah, absolutely. So I feel like this was really good in terms of thinking about it from an Indian perspective, from the global South's perspective, thinking about where our foreign policy has gaps, holes, where our domestic policy has holes, and what can be exploited, what are our vulnerabilities. I feel like that's a really good subject also to delve in, but perhaps another time. But this was so good. I feel like we could go on for hours because our gripes with the Western civilization and what they've been up to for the past I don't know 500 years is like an endless sort of storm. But we'll kind of wrap it up here. I feel like it was such a pleasure getting your thoughts about this. You're always exceptionally pointed and exceptionally insightful in these things, and you have a grip on a lot of different aspects of geopolitics. So, thank you so much for doing this. And I think we should certainly pick up kind of topical issues like this once in a while, maybe discuss them from an Indian perspective, and put that out for our viewers. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to us, and thank you for doing this and for being a part of our intellectual circle where we discuss these things and all of that. So thank you, Ruchir.
All right. So thank you so much for thinking of me
Yeah.
on this topic and inviting me again to speak on it. And if I had to just make a closing remark, I think in this new era of transparent and naked imperialism, if there's one lesson that all countries of the world, especially of the global south, the developing world, need to understand, is that the new style of hegemon we have
Mm-hmm.
in Trump, in the new U.S. of MAGA,
Mm-hmm.
is that they respect winners, not losers.
Right.
When you
Right.
radiate power as a winner, that's what Trump respects. For
Yes.
example, why does this is a domestic example. So Trump hates the Democrats. He hates the Democratic establishment, Democratic media. But who does he love from the Democrats? He loves Zohran Mamdani because he's a winner.
Yeah.
Zohran
Right.
Mamdani has an aura of a winner, of a guy who's in charge and knows that he
Mm.
is. And even
Right.
though they're completely opposite in terms of their policies, when you see them interact with each other, they're so chummy that Trump even says, it's okay, you can call me a dictator, I don't mind, criticize me because he respects winners. And
Right. Right.
similarly,
Right.
why does he love Netanyahu, who can do whatever he
Yes.
wants? Why does he like
Just the
Erdogan, who
strength.
can do whatever he wants? Yeah, why does he like
Right.
Orban, who does whatever
Yeah.
he wants? Is because
Absolutely.
he respects strength. So strength is to be
Mm.
respected and weakness is to be punished. Any country that shows
Absolutely.
weakness gets
Mm.
extra punishment for the weakness. Then he forgets what the
Absolutely.
original reason was. Now he's just punishing you because you deserve it.
And because you
So
can, I feel like just exploiting weakness is like what bullies do when they sense
yes,
it. And that way, it's a great lesson for India to not just project strength internationally, but also kind of actually be strong. I feel like there can be more that the government can do to develop uh, a greater strength domestically, um, in unification, in different things like we discussed the separatism and the narrative surrounding everything in our country, funding academia and studies that are more positive rather than negative, documentaries and all of that the Western, propaganda machine engages in. There's a
yes.
lot for us to learn. We shouldn't be like a paper tiger, like you said. A display of strength is always respected, and that's a great takeaway.
Yes, and it's like Nkrumah said, what is neocolonialism? A country that looks sovereign on the outside, acts sovereign on the outside, but inside is running its society, running its economy for the benefit of outsiders. And that's what India is
Exactly.
right now. That we're very good at being sovereign in foreign policy, but internally we're running the country for the approval of the West. And
Absolutely.
that we're
I
still
agree
plugged
with you
into
there.
this Anglo mindset that our policymakers are not exposed to other models. So, to French systems of law and constitutionalism, or to Japan, or even a country like Rwanda, who have overcome colonial era divisions in society. And if you want to end separatism, there's a very elegant solution to that. We don't need states, which are each run by some sort of regional center. In Japan, in France, and in India as well, we can have a two-level system that there's a central government and there's districts. We have 550 districts. Give each of them a directly elected prefect or mayor, give each of them an executive council, but no legislature. They don't need to make their own laws. One country should have one law, and don't give them their own private police force to use against their rivals. Federal police, federal law, and regionalized outcomes. Regionalized delivery of government services, of infrastructure, and this way, you, know, you dilute the power that separatists have and that foreign countries have to split off your territory. It's easy for them to split off, Nagaland or Tamil Nadu or Kashmir. If you have 550 districts, they can't split off 50 of them at once.
That's such an excellent insight. I feel like um, we rarely study political governance models outside Western nations, and that's a huge gap in our education, and even at the higher levels, at postgraduate level and above, the just the Anglo-centric study, even at least from what I've seen, from the academic publications that come out, there's a focus on a little bit of global south where the issues lie, and then there's a huge focus on learning from the West. So I feel like there's all of these things in the middle to learn from. Like you mentioned China learning from the Russian disintegration. So there's so much for us to, I feel like this gap is huge, and it takes a huge kind of overhaul of the education system to fix this and get our bureaucrats, our politicians, our young researchers thinking about these things in this light. And there's so much change to be done. There's a a long way to go for us, right?
Yes, and China knows exactly where they want to be as a state, as a society in 2100. So
Exactly.
if you ask someone in the Indian policy-making establishment, what is, India's position? Where will India be in 2100? Instead of positive goals that, oh, India will be like this, will that, survival is enough. The right that the republic survives is more important than the public thriving, and it should be about thriving, not surviving. Even cockroaches
You're
survive. So
absolutely right.
cockroaches survive a nuclear holocaust. We don't need to survive. We need to thrive, and we have to create
You're
an enabling
absolutely right.
environment wherein our society can thrive.
Absolutely. And I think China does this well also, where markers beyond just economic growth are important to kind of label their progress and kind of mark their progress. And that's something India hasn't been able to do. I feel like we measure everything in terms of economic progress,
Hmm.
and we kind of push like public happiness, harmony, ecological issues, in the indices of quality of life to the back burner. And like you said, most of our economic growth benefits foreign corporation, even though it seems like it's benefiting us. And that's a huge kind of gap in the way our state is thinking about progress and development in general. And that's where China is kind of integrating more of a vision for its country, and we are not.
Yes.
Even though, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, and there's two blind spots that the Indian Republic and policy making elite have. One is that they think that the absence of conflict is peace, but that can also just be the delaying of violence, or it can be the bribing of violent actors, which is also detrimental because that just emboldens them in the long run. And the other blind spot that they have is so 1 second. Uh, I forgot. So one blind spot is the absence of peace. Oh yes, there. And the second blind spot that our policymakers have is they think that economic growth is some sort of panacea to all ills. That, oh, just wait until we have a per capita income of 10,000 US dollars per head, and then all our problems will get solved. No, what's the
Exactly.
point of fattening your cow when your neighbors are butchers who are sharpening their knives? They are not
Exactly.
fattening their cows. They don't care about their economy. Does Sri Lanka care about its economy? No. Sri Lanka cares about winning its civil war. They won the civil war. They set the economy on fire, but they're winners as a result. And then
Exactly.
they don't care what happens to the economy. Similarly, Bangladesh doesn't care what happens to their economy. Pakistan doesn't care what happens to their economy. For them, creating a state that reflects their majority will is more important, and that's what they've done. And there's always,
Exactly.
a big naive country like India that's growing its economy, and one day you can carve your piece out of the carcass. So,
Absolutely.
you have to first take care of your neighbors, the butchers who are sharpening the knives, before you risk fattening your cow.
That's uh, that's so true. Again, it's concerning, and I feel like we can talk about these things and just get a little disheartened because we don't see any change even the past like 7 8 years in these respects. We see more projection of strength, like you said, and but not enough real change. For instance, trying to bring in the CAA, which kind of benefits Pakistani Hindus that are being persecuted, um, showed what the Indian state, even with a hugely, democratic elected, like a huge mandate, is incapable of doing. And that's a huge lesson for us in terms of the strength we really have when it comes down to it to make any move that is contrary to international narratives or will. So this is concerning, and these are some of the things that our state neglects. And like you said, just economic growth is just simply not enough. And that's something we all need to talk about, but I'm not sure where it's getting us really. I feel a little doomer when I say this, but I don't know how optimistic you are about these things.
I think it's not about optimism or pessimism. In the long run, any system with contradictions will either address those contradictions or collapse because of them.
Due to them,
And
right?
and then you have a chance for creative destruction and reconstruction. So either you fix it now. So yeah, it's good that we're talking about it. It's good that others are realizing the shortcomings of the First Republic. Now, we can be proactive and try to shape a new style of governance, a new polity, a new constitution that is a vessel for our people's aspirations to be taken to the next level, instead of an extractive, semi-colonial, semi-feudal state that doesn't trust its citizens, that seeks to push them down. Or we can choose to do nothing, just like we did in the 80s and 90s with our economy. And then one day the IMF comes and World Bank says, okay, you're going to reform your economy whether you like it or not. Do you want to do it with a sense of ownership, or do you want to do it because you reached a point of collapse and you have no choice? So it's better to do it on your own terms. And that's something that I hope that our policymakers can understand.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's a good note to end on if you have nothing else. And again, I really like these in policy discussions and international law discussions. So we had like a false ending there for a bit before, but thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for talking to us, and I really like value your opinion and appreciate it as always. So thank you so much, and I'm sure our viewers will feel the same. So I hope people watch this and kind of reflect.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again for inviting me over. And yeah, I hope to all the viewers that you take these ideas, plant a seed in your mind, and then grow it, and run with it. You're all empowered citizens. You all have and deserve the chance to shape your country, its institutions, and its future in a way that works for you, that serves you. It serves you as an individual, you as a family, you as a tribe, you as a collective.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we'll be excited to call you back sometime. Thank you so much.
Great.